sorry I couldn't be in class today, but I'm going to be presenting my text set, and I chose to do World War II texts written about or during this time period, but I chose to do it on a unit on perspective. So my box is designed as a window because perspective, you see things differently through the same window. On the inside, I just painted a little Polaroid, and the main question we are focusing on is how do our own personal perspectives and opinions alter after we read about children or adults going through things as tough as the Holocaust or other instances in World War II. Therefore, my first book is called Rose Blanche, and this is written by Roberto Innocenti. And this book kind of aims at showing the effects of the Holocaust on children from outside the parameters of the Nazi regime. And it focuses on the compassion of children relating to other children who may be different from them. So therefore, a girl who is not Jewish and who is not part of the genocide compared to children that are actually in concentration camps. And I think that's a very important message displayed in this children's book. So here's just a little peek at the inside of the book. And this book is a children's book, so it's written for grades K through 5, but I would be using it in an English class at the 11th grade level, do it through this unit. So this book could be presented as either a think aloud, so either me reading it myself and thinking aloud as I read, or breaking the students up into separate groups of 3 to 4 students, or through story impressions. So the class would be divided into 2 groups, and one group would have the book, a copy of the book, but the pictures would be covered by construction paper, and they would have to do a story impression based on just the words alone, and then vice versa for the other group, and then we'd come together as a group, and they would have to discuss and debate why they were different. And then a follow-up activity for this book would be to read another excerpt from another novel from an adult perspective, since this is a child's perspective. So something from either a textbook or a novel that I've read previously called The Survivor Story by Severin Fairman. Second book that I chose is called Erica's Story, written by Ruth Vander Zee and, again, Roberto Innocenti. And this book is a picture book, and it gives a second-hand account of the story of how 2 parents sacrificed themselves to save the life of their daughter from becoming a victim of the Holocaust. So they end up throwing her out of the train as they are going to the concentration camp. And then she grows up and she has no idea what her true identity is. And I loved this book. Here's another peek at the inside. The illustrations are wonderful, so then that leads into how I would present this book. I would present this book in 2 ways. One being a KWL chart, but I would modify it a little bit and have students each create their own. They would each be given a small trifold poster, and they would have to complete the chart in any medium that they'd like, but it would all be based on their own personal experiences with text from this time period or dealing with the Holocaust or anything relative to that. And then we'd come together as a whole in a literature circle, and they would present them informally just so we get a basis of where everyone is with this material. And then this book is also a children's book, so grades 1 to 3, but I would be using it again at the 11th grade level. And that's that book. Third book that I did is A Separate Piece by John Knowles, and this book is a fictional account of the darkest parts of adolescence, and it kind of goes back and forth between 2 boys at a boarding school in New Hampshire, and the backdrop of this novel is World War II, so that's why I chose it, and also because war is a very prominent theme throughout. So this book would be introduced with debates because there's a mock trial at the end, so we would go through the whole novel and learn courtroom debate and then perform our own mock trial before the trial is released in the book. And then we'd also do thematic maps to track the themes of war and things like that. And then this book is for grades 6 to 12, and it is naturalism or extreme realism. The fourth book that I did was Lord of the Flies by William Golding, and this might be an odd choice. However, the war mentioned in this book is not necessarily World War II, but it is speculated that it is. So that's why I chose this. And again, war is a theme in this. So this is a psychological novel into the expedition into the effects of war and how it affects the perspectives of children and how savage people can become when left with only the enticing power that's in their midst. This book is for grades 6 to 12. The genre is allegory, speculative fiction, and psychological fiction. There's a lot going on here. So I would introduce this book by first dividing the class in half. They could pick their own groups There'd be 2 teams. The first team would be in charge. Basically, the premise is that they're stranded on an island and they have to figure out what the best way to survive is, because that's what happens in the novel. This would be before I even introduce it. And team 1 would be in charge of finding a means for survival, so shelter and exploring the island for a way to escape. And then team 2 would be in charge of finding a plan for gathering food and other ways to get the attention of help. And they would each have a couple days to devise their plan, and then we'd come together and debate and argue. And I kind of want them to see how it was for the children in this novel and how the characters developed. And then they would be presenting this in a large-scale Venn diagram on the board. And another way to do this would be through a sketch to stretch graphic organizer, which I actually did, and I'll show you then. And a follow-up activity I thought for this would be to have students write a personal poem about a personal war or beast that they've had to overcome, and these would just be submitted for a grade. There would be no sharing. So my sketch to stretch, I actually focused on the first 6 pages of chapter 1, and I drew a little picture. It's kind of hard to see, it didn't print in color, but I kind of just drew a picture of the landscape and how there's a giant scar on the beach because of the plane crashing, and there's only 2 characters introduced, and there's palm trees. So that's kind of how I described that. 5th book that I chose is called The Child in Prison Camp by Shizuo Takashima. And this is a biography, and it's a personal account of the horror that a Japanese-Canadian child and her family faced because Japan was at war with the United States in 1942. And it focuses on the widespread act of racism that the Canadian government directed at the Japanese residents during this time. So this book is for grades 6 to 8, and like I said, it is a biography. I would present this book by reading it side by side with Night by Elie Wiesel, which is the next book. And when reading both of these books, I'd have the students do a compare and contrast chart because they both focus on personal accounts from 2 different childhood perspectives of being in 2 different parts of the world, but also being in a prison camp and having to deal with that on 2 scales. I also have them do a timeline for this book because it is very historically based because it is a personal account. And as a follow-up activity, they would choose a couple historical events or maybe one, and they'd have to research it and then use both evidence from their resources and then from the text to write a persuasive essay about how these situations shaped the novel. The 6th book I read was, like I said, Night by Elie Wiesel, and this is a memoir, and it follows the experiences of the teenager Eliezer as he and his father are thrown into the horrors of the Holocaust, and they're taken to a concentration camp. And it kind of also, the theme is war and being on this edge of hope and on the brink of despair. So this is for grades 3 to 12. I wouldn't necessarily read it with younger levels. I'd read it more at the high school level because that's when I read it. And like I said, it is a memoir. But I would read this side by side with A Child in Prison Camp. And I would have them complete 2 story maps, one for each text, and then we'd connect them through the similar sequencing of certain plot events. So I would create this map myself and make it that way. But I would have them do a story pyramid for this to track the main character and the events that affected him. And I will show you that. And then as a follow-up activity, I would have them perform a cat in the rough, which is a lesson that I've done before and I love it. And I'd pick 3 objects from the novel, so I chose a bell, a yellow star, and a train, and they'd be asked to write their own story, so like a flash fiction, no more than 700 words. And they'd have to develop a character, have a cliffhanger, just some creative writing to stem off of this and show their own perspective about the events that happened. And then the last, this is the story pyramid that I did for Night by Elie Wiesel. I don't know if you can really see that, but that's what I did. And then the last book that I read is called Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. And this is a work of historical fiction that follows the journey of a 15-year-old girl, Lena, as she is taken from her home in Lithuania in 1941 by Soviet police, and she's placed into a prison camp in Siberia. And it is for grades 6 to 12. It is historical fiction. And I would have students, I would introduce this book with a storyboard and have them do that on storyboardthat.com, but they would have to pick 6 instances in the novel that they think can be represented by one scene or image, and they would have to create it that way and then present it. And then the second way I'd have them do this is through vocabulary triangles. But because the chapters are short, it'd be 21 chapters at a clip because it is, like I said, an 11th grade classroom, so they can read it. It's not hard reading. And then they'd have to connect 3 words from different chapters in that sequence and then connect them, and then we would do that every week for vocabulary. And a follow-up activity I thought for this, which I was really excited about, was to do a time capsule, because in the novel she buries documents about her experiences in her hometown in Lithuania, and it was found in 1995. And because she didn't want anyone to forget what happened with the Baltic genocide. So I thought, why not have students do their own time capsule? But they would have to write their own letters, seal them in envelopes, and then we would create a video file explaining why we did this and why we did this because of this project, and then we would open it in 20 years. So here's my story pyramid that I did, and I just chose a word from the first couple chapters, the middle couple chapters, and then the last couple chapters of the first 21 chapters in that book, and I did my own vocabulary triangle. And that is my text set. I know that probably went over 5 minutes, but I was trying to get it all in so you guys got a sense of what I was thinking as I did this text set. But that is all I have. Thank you for listening.